Is Frankie Edgar finally stepping out of the octagon? He's been fighting in the UFC since 2007, but UFC 281 will be his last showing. Plus, what weakness is Israel Adesanya planning to exploit in Alex Pereira? And which old rival of Adesanya's would kill him if he had the chance? Stay tuned for all that plus more MMA news coming right up. First off, Frankie Edgar. If UFC 281 is Frankie Edgar's last fight in the UFC, then it should be a big event. Frankie has fought for almost 15 years across 3 divisions in the organization and rightfully earned himself a place in the UFC history. He rose to become a title contender with early wins over Sean Sherk and Matt Veach before taking on the legendary BJ Penn for the lightweight championship. And it was Frankie who came out on top after 5 rounds to end Penn's 2-year title reign. Frankie defended the title 3 times from there and never regained it. But that doesn't mean he was finished. He went on to take out some of the biggest names in the sport, including Charles Oliveira and Cub Swanson, but fell just short of winning the featherweight title against Jose Aldo. That's what has earned Frankie respect throughout the MMA world. Longtime UFC referee Big John McCarthy said that Frankie deserves a big show for a man who has had an incredible career. Edgar announced earlier this year that he would only fight one more time before retiring and asked the UFC to match him up with Dominic Cruz, the former UFC bantamweight champion. But after Edgar was brutally knocked out by Marlon Vera, Dana White had other ideas. So his last appearance in the UFC will be against Chris Gutierrez, a tough fighter who only has 1 loss in the UFC. MMA fighters everywhere will be hoping that Frankie can go out with a win though. Another legend retires. The one man who stopped Frankie Edgar dead in his tracks was Jose Aldo. Twice, he denied Edgar the opportunity to become a 2-division UFC champion. With Aldo announcing his retirement recently too, the UFC turns the page on a huge chapter of its history. Aldo's probably the most dominant featherweight that MMA has ever seen. He defended the World Extreme Cage Fighting Championship before the company merged with the UFC and didn't slow down one bit. He continued his dominance with another 7 straight wins before he was knocked out in his most infamous loss to Conor McGregor, who was in the process of becoming a global superstar. After a break away from MMA, Aldo returned, but he was never destined to reclaim the title. He was no match for a new batch of fighters like Alexander Volkanovski and Peter Yan, but he did get a 3-fight win streak going before he announced his retirement in August this year. UFC president Dana White led the praise for the former champion, telling him that the UFC will always be his house and that the Brazilian was instrumental in helping to build the company. So Aldo may have denied Frankie Edgar his place as a 2-division champion, but who can blame Frankie? Next, the UFC 281 main act. Fight fans everywhere will be keen to tune in to send Frankie Edgar off, but the main event is a tantalizing title bout between 2 of the deadliest strikers on the planet. Reigning middleweight champion Israel Adesanya will take on his former kickboxing rival Alex Pereira in a highly anticipated matchup. Pereira is the only man to have knocked out Adesanya before in a professional fight. That's what has helped skyrocket the Brazilian into a title fight after just 3 fights with the UFC. Adesanya has assured his fans that it will be business as usual for the dominant champion, but he had some advice from a veteran that might give him pause. In a video posted to Izzy's YouTube channel, George St. Pierre talked with Adesanya about the challenges of staying at the top. GSP was champion of both the welterweight and middleweight divisions in the UFC and held the welterweight title for more than 5 years with 9 consecutive title defenses. So if there's anyone that Adesanya should take advice from, it's GSP. The Canadian legend warned Adesanya that the crown is heavy and that this moment could still only be the beginning of a long career. He also encouraged Izzy to keep the fire that motivates him and stick to what's working for him. That can't be too hard at the moment. Everything seems to be working for the last stylebender. Whether it's defensive striking from the back foot or putting pressure on, Izzy always knows exactly which strategy to use against his opponents. Up next, what is was Adesanya planning to exploit in Alex Pereira's technique, and which UFC legend would literally kill Izzy if he had the chance. So don't go anywhere. A rival that just won't leave. There are some rivalries in MMA that just refuse to die. Adesanya's rivalry with Robert Whittaker is one of them, and for good reason. Whittaker has arguably been the closest fighter to Adesanya's standard over the last couple of years, with the fellow New Zealanders dominating the rest of the division. Whittaker's only 2 defeats in the past 8 years have been at the hands of Izzy, and now he is hunting a trilogy fight. After he took out Marvin Vettori at UFC Paris, he declared himself the most dangerous man in the middleweight division. Whittaker explained that he inflicts much more damage on his opponent than Adesanya, who has been more defensive in his more recent title fights. And he thinks that his last opportunity for the elusive middleweight title is coming up. Whittaker said that he is sure he'll get at least one more shot at gold, especially after the way their second meeting ended. The Reaper came closer than ever that night to beating Adesanya, but it ended in a unanimous decision in Izzy's favor. Even though Whittaker is determined to finish off a trilogy, Adesanya doesn't seem as interested. Earlier this year, the champion dismissed the idea, saying, "I've read that book twice already." For now, Adesanya is firmly focused on how to avoid the deadly left hook of Alex Pereira, but Whittaker will be waiting with open arms to fight whoever wins. He has already admitted that Adesanya is a terrible matchup for him, so maybe he would fare better against Pereira. How Pereira will be exploited. For a man with just 8 professional MMA fights, Alex Pereira sure has moved his way to the top quickly. Sure, he had a long, successful career as a kickboxing champion, but MMA is a different beast, and he is being warned that Israel Adesanya is much better versed in this world than him. Robert Whittaker was one of many people taken aback by just how fast Pereira has moved up the food chain in the UFC. Whittaker thinks that there are many fighters in the middleweight division who he doesn't match up well against, but that his opponents were well picked to guarantee him a smooth path to Adesanya. Having said that, Whittaker thinks that the UFC 281 headliner will be a good fight, and it will make for a big show. There is a long backstory building up to it, and the UFC clearly knew what they were doing. But Pereira is being warned that he may have bitten off more than he can chew. A man who knows that more than most is Jared Cannonier, who Adesanya defended his title against at UFC 275. According to Cannonier, Izzy is the heavy favorite purely because of his experience. Adesanya has fought 5-round championship fights with the best of the best. As for fighting style, Cannonier thinks that Pereira's kickboxing style may have served him well up until now, but that Adesanya will exploit them come fight night. Next up, Cejudo thinks that Adesanya's rival would kill him. If you're counting, then you'll have noticed that Adesanya has no shortage of rivals. His confidence, trash talking, and status as champion have given him many enemies, and one of the biggest of those is Jon Jones. Jones is a former light heavyweight who is rightfully considered one of the best MMA fighters to ever live. In his prime, watching a Jones fight was the most entertaining event in mixed martial arts. But Bones Jones has been focused on a different division recently, with a move up to heavyweight as his next goal to cement himself into the history books. And online, Jon Jones and Israel Adesanya have been trading blows for years now, with both arguing that they are the greatest. Henry Cejudo himself, a former 2-division UFC champion, has weighed in on the debate. On an episode of his podcast, he claimed that Jones would kill Israel. And he didn't just mean beat him. He meant that Jones hates Adesanya so much that he might actually kill him. Izzy has spared no opportunity to comment on Jones' volatile life outside of the octagon, which includes drug use, domestic abuse charges, and even talking about Jones's dead mother. Those swipes have clearly gotten under his skin, and Jon would love the opportunity to fight Adesanya. But with Izzy sticking to middleweight and Jon on his way to heavyweight, the chances of that happening soon are slim to none. Who do you think will come out on top between Adesanya and Pereira? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.